All right, greetings everyone. My name is Malcolm Steinberg. I use the pronouns he and him. I'm a member of the Faculty of Health Sciences at SFU, and on behalf of my co-organizers of tonight's event, Travis Sďwx, who is a colleague from Health Sciences, Adal Iskander, a colleague from the Center for Comparative Muslim Studies, and Kendra Strauss, a colleague from Labor Studies, I welcome you here tonight in joining us on these cherished, stolen, and unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples. This event is co-sponsored by the Faculty of Health Sciences, the Center for Comparative Muslim Studies, the Morgan Labour Project, and the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, the Schools for International Studies and Communication, and the Institute for Humanities, all from Simon Fraser University. We are very grateful, and I'd like to say this at the outset, for the image on the poster for this event, which has been provided by the Al-Madoun family with a request to amplify the work of Mahmoud Al-Madoun, who started a soup kitchen in northern Gaza, supported by his older brother Hani, who is living in Virginia, who explained in an NBC interview that the mainstay of the soup is often the ground corn and grain meant for pigeons and rabbits. The soup kitchen sustains up to 3,000 people daily and is a testament to the tremendous resilience and community solidarity of the Gazan communities. The kitchen is funded largely by online donations, and we encourage you to support Mahmoud and his efforts, and we have a QR code there for you to link into. Tonight, we will bring a sharp focus to the impact of the relentless, cruel, and dehumanizing onslaught in Gaza on Palestinian health and well-being, and hope to move all of us to greater action in bringing this genocide to a halt. We do so cognizant that our attention has been momentarily diverted from Gaza, from the events over the last few days, but we hope that this event will allow us to refocus our activity, our actions on bringing this inhumanity to an end. I will pause my opening remarks here before introducing our speakers to you in turn to ask Salia, Joseph, and Jada-Gabrielle Pape to situate our events on these ancestral indigenous lands and to take this opportunity to embrace teachings from and to draw linkages and find solidarity between the oppressed people in Palestine and the indigenous people in Canada. Salia Joseph is a Squamish and Snuneymuxw, British and Jewish. She is a graduate of the First Nations and Indigenous Studies program at UBC and cares deeply about decolonial and intersectional approaches to learning and caring for one another. Salia is the executive director of the Sníchim Foundation, a Squamish non-profit focused on language revitalization and immersion-based learning. She's also a part owner of Host Consulting, Inc., which is a Musqueam Squamish Tsleil-Waututh consultancy focusing on public heart and decolonial dialogues. Jada-Gabrielle Pape is a Coast Salish from the Saanich and Snuneymuxw nations on Vancouver Island. She's passionate about creating safer spaces for all people, healthy and direct communication, and decolonizing. She has been working with rural and remote indigenous peoples and communities for more than 28 years, including environmental organizations, municipalities, school boards, hospitals, and prisons. Her anti-oppression and anti-racism work is birthed out of traditional and wise teachings brought forward from elders, knowledge keepers, community members, and mentors. She holds a master's from UBC and is also a certified professional counselor who specializes in trauma and grief, and a college instructor at the Justice Institute of BC, and a filmmaker, a mixed media painter, and a single mother to a fantastic 16-year-old daughter. It's my pleasure to ask Salia to provide us with the acknowledgement.
Sḳwx eocht noyap, Salia Joseph Queen Snas to hate elo qui Uncle Shamin, Floyd Joseph, Squattaquampton Siem, Llanman, Eve Joseph, Llancisha, Larry Joseph, Squattaquampton Siem, Eamon, A Rose Thomas, Llan Altach, Tanachint La Stopmas, O Humeo, Wetlamot 80, come lie. Kai Ochton took nom eoch ta Ahmasquium to slay with oath, they to quote Mish Dalmo, eoch ta Smahamchet. Slates Quins, so Kai Ochton took nom eoch to Noyap, quiz nom 80, T took nut. Quin Miles Chuan eoch ta Stalmoch, eoch ta man, not qua Gaza, eoch Squile. On Hammond Squallowin, eoch Squile. Wet. Talt Nawas eoch ta Sňwx took nom ta Palestinian stalmoch eoch Squile. Hello everybody, my name is Salia Joseph. My ancestral name is Tehei Alot. I come from the village of Sţwx in the Squamish Valley at the foot of the Chief. That's where my father, Squattaquampton Siem, holds his hereditary chieftainship. And my father is a carver, and he's Sḳwx and Snuneymuxw from the island, which is what ties me to my cousin sitting over there in the beautiful hat. My cousin who asked me to come here tonight, who's asked me to come to many events, and I always try and make it when I can, and I'm always humbled to be in her presence because she's omnipresent and somehow everywhere at all times. My mother's Eve Joseph. She's a writer, a poet. She was also a former hospice social worker, so she's in the health field herself for about 20 years. And she's British, Ashkenazi, and Sephardic Jewish. So, as I mentioned, I've been asked to come open several events or marches or talks in solidarity with Palestine 6 months now, and I don't want to do it anymore in this way. I don't want to have to grieve with you all anymore. But in oh my gosh. She's just asking for a medic over in front center. Pardon? Pardon? Okay. Okay, somebody's calling 911. There's also a midwife at the front too. I don't know if that we could send her up. Oh. Do you think you should go? Maybe go. I'll just wait for people to be able to take their seats again, but at your own pace here. Two midwives. Yeah, two midwives and doctors. Well, I certainly had it in my mind when I sat down that I wanted to offer prayer, so now I definitely will. But in this case, prayers for life also, which are the prayers that we always have to accompany with our prayers for grief and our prayers for rage and our prayers for something different, for better futures. But what I was wanting to say was, in October, when I was first called to speak, I really thought to myself, oh my God, like, who am I? What are the words? How do you chime in? And but in Salish teachings, when somebody reaches out to you and they ask you to do something, in a vein of ceremony, we don't say no, we show up. And also, as part of our governance systems, as part of how we tell stories and record histories and pass down who we are as Stómach, as Sḳwx and Snuneymuxw people from generation to generation, as we call witnesses. If you've ever been to a Salish ceremony, you'll hear the speaker who has a robe across their chest and a headband across their head, and they'll be calling out the names of the people present and asking them to witness what was happening today. And at the end of the ceremony, you have witness speakers who, when you're called as a witness, you are really paying attention to everything that's happening, because you might get called at the end to speak. And if you get called at the end, you stand up and you do the best you can, and that's what I'm doing. And for the last 6 months, I've been witnessing. I've been waiting, taking down every detail that I can, so that if I get asked to speak, I'll do the best I can. And here I am. As a Sḳwx person in my ancestral territory who grapples with generations of intergenerational trauma and strength, and myself made a career of language revitalization as a result of colonialism. I have watched for so many social movements as Palestinian people have shown up for us. And I've watched the people that I've loved and respected, like the late Lee Miracle, show up for Palestinian people. And I watched and read the people that I was learning to create my own politic from, talk about Palestinian liberation. So I've been a student to the impact of the people of Palestine on some of the greatest minds for a long time. And now we've come to a place where Palestinian people have held up a mirror to the world. They've held up a mirror and they've asked us to look at ourselves. As Native people, they've asked us to look at our own movements of decolonization, to look at ourselves and what we've asked for. They've taught us to ask for more. They've taught us to be literal in what we ask for, that decolonization is literal, it's not a metaphor. Palestinians have held a mirror up to every single facet of society, to our healthcare system, to our legal system. They've held a mirror up certainly within our through journalism and media. They've had us all take a look at ourselves. They've had us all take a look at the structures that we thought we knew, and we are watching what we thought we knew about our society, crumble in front of us because of the bravery and the authenticity of the Palestinian people. And so when I think about witnessing, I think about how important it is to be paying such close attention, to be the collective memory, to know that as the colony of Israel, the state of Israel, as they bomb archives. I saw today a headline about bombing a fertility center. As they try and bomb futures, as they try and bomb memory, I want you to hold on to this concept of witnessing, because after 150 years of colonization for my own people, it's witnessing that has kept us true to who we are. And it's that same principle of being attentive and really learning to watch with open eyes and critical ears, that we can all do this together to create an honest memory of what we're seeing, and to hold that mirror up to ourselves to learn how to do better, learn how to do more, and insist on better futures for all of us, for all of our kids. Because what we know is that these mirrors that Palestinian people are holding up are for all of our children, all of our futures. They are demanding a future for themselves that our future, my daughter Alaytla's future, Thomas here, is reliant on. So I just wanted to hold on to the concept of witnessing, because from my own people, even though our struggles are so different, I just know there's certain things that people can't touch no matter how hard they try. And that the more people that stand and gather with Palestinian folks, the harder it is for people to try and take what they can't touch. And I want to just, in closing, say that I've been on the university to talk about Palestine and my unwavering support here as a host nation in these territories, but by students, not by faculty. So I wanted to express my delight at that, but also how basic of a necessity that is, and that I wish it wasn't the anomaly for centers that are producing, that are supposed to be producing the critical minds of our country. It shouldn't be an anomaly to speak out against genocide. You shouldn't have to be afraid to speak up against genocide. And as my two midwife friends, my best friend Keisha and Heba, walked down the stairs, they actually asked me to put together a presentation for midwives around why what's happening in Palestine is an issue that everyone ought to care about. And through a health lens, I just think that lens is so important, particularly around healthcare, around a Hippocratic oath that doesn't see race, that doesn't see those, that isn't supposed to see those barriers. But again, that mirror, right? The mirror that the Palestinian people are holding up to the world to make us look at ourselves, to make us know what systems have to crumble so that we can rebuild better. So I just want to raise my hands to everybody for coming. Coast Salish people say at our gatherings, you could have been anywhere tonight, but you chose to be here. And time is such a valuable commodity, and the Palestinian people are where so much of our time needs to be going. And I just want to raise my hands to all of our speakers. And I will just end by saying a prayer. So I'll just get everybody to stand if you can. And first of all, I want to pray to that pregnant person that was struggling. I just hope that they are safe and that their baby's safe, and they had it in their heart to come tonight. However far along they were. As a former pregnant person, it's hard getting from A to B, and I really see that dedication. But I just want to explain before I start my prayer that that prayer can look very differently for other people. So you can pray however it is that you pray. But if prayer isn't something that you're used to, then I'm asking people to hold the people of Gaza, the Palestinian people in the diaspora, and particularly in their occupied homelands and territories in their hearts. And for me, really, I can't stop thinking about that playground that's been in the news. As a mom of a toddler who goes to a playground every day, that's what's really in my heart today, and I just wanted to say that out loud. I didn't bring a drum or a rattle, but I really had it in me today that I'd like to offer a song for prayer. And just hopefully what you can do is look around and see these people who care and who are wanting the same future that you are. And it feels a lot less lonely and a lot less defeating when you stand with the people who move you, the people that you can walk with, that see your humanity and that you can feel safe around. So this is a prayer song by Reina Trero, Chief Sissiem Reina Trero. It was gifted to my family, the Joseph family. It's a Thunderbird song. Oh, 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 highway, high, Sďwx and Sníchim, I just want to reiterate that in Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish territory, the Palestinian people are always welcome. Sďwx and Sníchim.
Sďwx. Ietsap Oeliel, Siaya, Siem, Sialachwa, ich imich ne eten, Tanatchat Tla, Husetnich Snuneymuxw o Chomeoch, Antha Jada-Gabrielle Pape, Antha Wasolwat, Heights Upka eat Sḳwx, the Musqueam eat Tsleil-Waututh, Mestimoch. Aitanash Alawan, Mestimoch Palestinian. My name is Jada-Gabrielle Pape, and I come from the Saanich and Snuneymuxw nations on Vancouver Island. I live here on these occupied homelands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people and their ancestors. I have family ties to both Musqueam and Squamish. I could just stop and just what she said, just go like that. And it strikes me that there is no more to say. We've been talking for 6 months. We've been witnessing. We've been shattered over and over for 6 months. And so one of the things that I do is I have no idea what I'm going to say. I just, whatever falls out of my face is what comes out. And it usually comes from here, which is what our cultural training teaches us, is to speak from your heart and you'll say the right thing. It will be honest, it will be true, it will be correct. I took myself for a walk today because I needed to settle my nervous system, which is something I think we all need to do right now, is every day return to our bodies, return to a practice that brings us home in a way, home within ourselves. And my nervous system has been exceptionally frazzled the last week after receiving death threats and being stalked and having my child targeted by a Zionist. And I think it might be the biggest Zionist fail there ever was, that at the end of being afraid, undeniably afraid, and upping safety and upping security for myself and my child, I felt like actually the takeaway wasn't the danger I was in, and it wasn't the danger my child is in. It's actually that I had so many people rally and come into the foreground and work to advocate and protect and demonstrate care and love. And it is what the deepest reciprocity looks like, is when we do something unconditionally. My solidarity with Palestine and with Palestinians is unwavering, and it is unconditional. We are, as my cousin said, 150 years into our own genocide. That many of us spoke at one event and one person received death threats and threats of sexual violence, and that happened to be the Indigenous person, is no coincidence. It is actually what colonialism teaches, is that we are not human, is that we are not valued, and that we are direct targets. So in the settling of my nervous system, I don't really take my dogs for a walk. They kind of take me for a little drag around the neighborhood. One of the things that happened for me is at the end of my walk, sort of at the tail end of an hour, which seems to be the sacred number for me. It's the 1 hour mark when I recognize what is that deep, profound place of knowing. And what I realized an hour into this walk is that the reason we can come together, the reason I can offer a teaching, the reason I can return to myself is because of the generous spirit of my ancestors. It's that same generous spirit that actually allowed for colonialism to take a foothold here and to do the violence it's done for 150 years. It's that same generous spirit of the people of Palestine that has allowed for the Zionist regime to take hold. It is actually the generosity of people that I choose to focus on. And in the settling of my nervous system, there is song, there is prayer, there's walking dogs, but I found some teachers in other places. And one of the places that I have returned to over and over, as Malcolm said, I have an art practice, and so I'm a longtime painter and bead worker. And in meeting many new Palestinian kin through this horrifying time of a genocide, one of the things that I could offer is to open my home as a place to come together and talk and be and teach each other and to be safe, to be held and cared for. So for quite a while, for quite a few months, we've been working together, a little Indigenous cohort and a little Palestinian cohort. And we would get together once a week and we would do beading and talk about what are the teachings of the beads, how every bead that's nestled next to another bead is actually like our people, that we sit together, we don't crowd each other, there is a teaching there, that we stay connected, we're in alignment, and together we all have an ugly phase where the beading piece doesn't look so good. We're like that as people, we have ugly phases, but we stick with it, and in the end it's beautiful. We stick together, we follow each other's by color, by pattern, by repetition, we show up again and again, and it's beautiful. We moved through beading and sharing teachings, and then we moved into tatreez, which is, for people who don't know, it's Palestinian embroidery. And I was like blown away because it's nothing. I was like, I can do this because it's nothing new. It's just little things, just like beads. I can totally do this. It's nothing like beadwork. It's totally, totally different. And tatreez offered all kinds of new teachings. And some of those teachings are that it is with the structure, it is with the repetition that we understand that those patterns carry very specific recognition of village sites, of places, of ancestral knowledge and teachings and memories. And also the patience of learning something new. So I'm almost 53, and I'm really happy that I'm almost 53 and I'm still willing to sit down and be very humbled and learn something. I'm very, very happy that at 50, almost 53, that I don't have to be a one-trick pony. I can know lots of different things and remain nimble and flexible. And Tatriz actually offered that to me most recently, that you're going to do this thing, you're not going to be very good at it, you should stick with it because there's something here for you. So I just kept sitting with it, and I had to ask for help, and I had to take my time in a very different way. And I actually had to go inwards. So the design that I chose for my first Tatriz was a star. And I chose the star because selfishly I recognized it. It looked like what we do as Sḳwx, as Indigenous people, we do star blanket designs. And I recognized the star, and I was like, I can totally do that. So I sat with that. And then I had to choose my colors. And within the star pattern, there's these little tiny, they look like a plus sign, which is something we also use in our designs. And so my friend Rawan taught me that those plus signs they're the sparkle in the star. So one night we were sitting together and we were working on Tatriz, and as I was sitting with it, I said, how many times do you think somebody had to do this design to make it regional, to make it specific to that place? And she said, yeah, and how many times did someone have to look at the sky to see the sparkles, to put them there? And then we both had this like, wait, are people in Palestine, are they looking at the same stars as us? And if there's anybody here who knows the answer, please be quiet because I still don't know it. And I'm not even embarrassed about that. It's just how it goes. We're like the way the world spins in the sky. I don't know. So I'm one of those people that learns by doing. So I will know the answer to that when Palestine is free and when we are there together and we are rebuilding, inshallah. It feels, you said I got 15 minutes. That wasn't 15 minutes. Malcolm, sit down. People. It feels important to recognize in these times that we're trying to figure out, how do we sustain this? How do we continue to do this? And the last week has been very stressful, with being targeted. And that is not my biggest takeaway. My biggest takeaway is break the patterns of silence and isolation. That is where our liberation is. A younger version of me would have given in to being afraid and would have sat back and would have remained isolated. A younger version of me would not have reached out because I wouldn't have wanted to burden people and because I would have been embarrassed and ashamed that this had happened, that this was done to me, that at a younger age, I might have even thought that I had created this because I spoke up in an unruly way, that I didn't behave like a dignified Westerner, that actually I broke protocol, I broke a social agreement in raising my voice in council chambers. A younger version of me might have stopped there. But at this age, I chose to break those patterns and to reach out, and that's where the safety is. So in these times when we are afraid to speak out for Palestine, it's actually important that we find our people, that we remain more connected, and that actually we use our collective voice. It is fundamental to our survival as humans. It is fundamental to our survival for our humanity that we have to raise our voices. We have to speak out of turn because the gaslighting is never ending. Part of what is happening in universities is happening in every institution, that there is a denial of what is right in front of us. And so we need to be with our people. We need to remain connected. And that can happen in a lot of different ways. It can happen through very small gestures. It can happen through very small activities. But I know that the resistance for my people, the reason we're still here, is because we continued to sit down and live in the practices that soothed our nervous system, that taught our children, and that made it so that we're not alone, that we're not isolated. And actually, that's the piece to focus on, is how do we get out of the isolation of this? And so it's using the tools of gathering, using whatever the superpowers that each of us has, and recognizing that there will be moments where it feels very sticky and very uncomfortable. And actually, part of the reason as Sḳwx, as people who belong to these lands, part of the reason we are so in right relationship with people who are Palestinian is because we see our experience in their experience. Every single thing that we are witnessing as happening in Gaza and the West Bank, every single thing has happened here to our people. It was not televised, but it happened. The crimes against children, the crimes against women, the crimes against elders, the crimes against men and little boys, the dehumanization, the slaughtering of animals, all of that has happened here. And we have to remember that. We can't walk around the streets and just see that this is a beautiful place. We actually have to find out the story and tell the story. That's what we have to normalize. Or we're perilously close to thinking that when Gaza, at the end of this genocide, that people will do trite land acknowledgements and territorial acknowledgements without telling the story. For so many years, our people were silenced. We were not put in the foreground. And our stories were made so uncomfortable that people wouldn't tell them. And then we started the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. That was done by people who had survived residential school. They led that. That was a group of people breaking silence. That was a group of people saying, I won't carry this shame as mine. This was done to us. We did not deserve this. We did not make this happen. There are so many parallels between Palestine and here. So those woven threads that come together, if you have a practice that can bring you home to your well-being, home to your body, soothing your nervous system, find it. If as a child you loved drawing circles, go draw circles, draw overlapping circles, find patterns, do repetition, return to your body so you can be sustained. Let yourself daydream for a future and do it in your body, because actually the first weapon of colonialism is to remove us from ourselves. Once we're disconnected from our own hearts, we can tolerate anything. So we actually, for our well-being and for the future of Palestine, for the future of humanity, we have to learn to withstand the tension, and we have to internalize our own well-being. We have to do that. And so find the practice, return to something that sometime in your life soothed you. Bring it back. Don't let it be a thing of the past. Let it be your guide into the future. It's the only way these conversations can continue. Our well-being depends on it. Oseam.
Thank you both for your plea to us to bear witness, and thank you for your teachings. As organizers of tonight's event, we are well aware that war is well recognized as a macro-level structural determinant of health. Besides the obvious consequences of war on mortality and the not sufficiently recognized fact that the mortality impacts of most wars are on civilians, war impacts on morbidity, both at a physical and psychological level. War displaces populations, violates human rights, causes environmental destruction, diverts human and financial resources, destroys schools and educational infrastructure and places of worship and cemeteries. And the focus tonight destroys health systems and supporting infrastructure. But this war, this onslaught on the Gazan population is of a scale and intensity that is unprecedented and dehumanizing. For us, it is clear that the intention is to make Gaza uninhabitable. And so this event aims to answer the question, what are the short, medium, and long-term impacts of the crisis in Gaza on the health and well-being of Palestinian people? And we begin by asking Dr. Kendra Strauss to provide us with some context for what we are witnessing. Dr. Strauss is a feminist economic and labor geographer who has published widely on paid and unpaid work, care labor, social reproduction, and geographies of labor regulation. She is professor in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology at Simon Fraser University, where she is the director of the Labor Studies program and associate member of the Department of Geography. She is also an editor, Human Geography, for the Annals of the American Association of Geographers.
Thank you, Malcolm. And thank you, Salia and Jada. As academics, we're taught to speak from the head and seldom from the heart, which is why my comments are written down. But I'm going to try and do a bit of both. So as Malcolm mentioned, I speak today as the director of the Labor Studies program at SFU, a co-sponsor of this event, and as a researcher of care and care work. It's an honor to say a few words alongside my fellow panelists whose expertise and experience in the struggles for justice and freedom for Palestine and Palestinian health workers far exceeds my own and is an inspiration to me. In other words, I feel like a little bit of an imposter up here. I'm not a health worker or a health researcher myself, but my remarks are intended to provide some context, which many of us know, but which needs to be spoken, for the genocide in Gaza and the intentional targeting of the healthcare system and healthcare workers there. In this sense, it's important to start with the history of the Zionist project in Palestine. This history will be familiar to many in this room, and yet is almost never acknowledged by our politicians, by the mainstream media, by the mainstream medical establishment, or by our university administrators. The invisibilization of this history enables their refusals to name and condemn the genocide in Gaza, the ethnic cleansing in the West Bank, and Israeli apartheid. It's important that we speak this history even in its most condensed and simplified form. That the fall of the Ottoman Empire after World War I led to the rule of Palestine by yet another empire, the British. That the 19th century birth of Zionism as a movement and a political ideology focused on the creation of a Jewish ethno-state in Palestine was fundamentally, in the words of its leader, Theodore Herzl, something colonial. And that the settler colonial project, enabled by the British Empire's mandate in Palestine, required for its realization the ethnic cleansing and mass expulsion of the thriving and diverse Palestinian population, including Palestinian Jews, that closely followed the unilateral Zionist declaration of the State of Israel. By 1948, around 800,000 Palestinians, or about around 80% of the population, had been ethnically cleansed. And between 1947 and 1949, about 15,000 Palestinians were killed in mass atrocities and massacres. Since the Nakba and prior to October 7th, 6 million Palestinians were living in refugee camps throughout Palestine and in neighboring countries. And those in Palestine, the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, live under military rule by Israel that Human Rights Watch, among many others, has labeled the crimes against humanity of apartheid and persecution. A key dimension of the regime of apartheid and the legal system that supports it is the arrest and arbitrary detention or mass incarceration of Palestinian people. And I speak this especially today because today is Palestinian Prisoners' Day. Before October 7th, Al Jazeera reported around 5,200 Palestinians, including children, were captive in Israeli jails. Now, an estimated 9,100 are officially detained, and thousands more adults and children have reportedly been detained by the Israeli army, tortured and interrogated in makeshift prisons across Gaza outside of any legal or civilian oversight. The escalation of arbitrary detention and the abuse, starvation, and torture of prisoners affect both Gaza and the West Bank, where more than 7,000 people have been arrested since October. In these recent and longer histories, we see plainly why settler colonial and imperialist states, including Canada, the USA, Britain, and Germany, support and enable economically, politically, and militarily Israel's occupation and ethnic cleansing of Palestine. We see why Germany, the nation state that perpetrated the Holocaust, forcibly shut down the Palestine Congress in Berlin last week. I'm sure many of you saw the coverage of this. Banned the Palestinian British surgeon Ghassan Abu Sitta from entering the country, and cut off the words of Palestinian researcher Salman Abu Sitta as he said, "We have never before seen all means of life systematically destroyed. Hospitals, clinics, schools, universities, libraries, ancient monuments, mosques, churches, universities, cemeteries, bakeries, apartment," and he was silenced. Silencing and attempted erasure, a land without a people for a people without a land, is the Zionist iteration of terra nullius, which solves the problem of European anti-Semitism through its territorial displacement, while securing, of course, the West's influence and interests in Palestine. Apartheid regimes, including in South Africa, learned from the settler colonial regime in this country we now call Canada. The dehumanization of Palestinians today and historically follows the violent logics of white supremacy and ethno-nationalism that legitimize borders and cages. It is from this context that the razing of Gaza, the genocidal intent of the State of Israel, expressed clearly in the statements of its own officials, broadcast live on social media, and so cogently and forcefully demonstrated in South Africa's case at the International Court of Justice, and the collective punishment of Palestinian people has played out before the eyes of the world. As Amar Azuz recently wrote, from the burning of books and libraries to destruction of museums and theaters, from bombing bridges to razing homes to the ground, erasure has become a weaponized tool to collectively punish people. In these processes of punishment, cities become battlefields. Tanks cut through people's streets and orchards to make space for invasions and destructions. Shops are vandalized by soldiers who want to destroy something more than a tiny shop. It is a destruction of a people, their livelihoods, their economy, their sense of identity and belonging. I would have written attempted destruction. The city is erased. The destruction and desecration, and I think here of Al-Shifa Hospital, of Gaza's healthcare infrastructure and the targeting and killing of healthcare workers has been a key feature, an intentional feature of this erasure. As of March 11th, Healthcare Workers Watch Palestine has reported at least 485 healthcare workers killed. There were over 1,000 attacks on healthcare delivery and healthcare workers. 311 healthcare workers have been arrested by the IOF, and their whereabouts are unknown. Only 12 of Gaza's 36 hospitals are even partially functioning. The Islamic University of Gaza Medical School has been destroyed, part of the campaign of scholasticide by Israel, alongside the only cancer treatment center in the Strip and Gaza's only pediatric cancer ward. Ambulances have faced attack, and an estimated 183 pregnant people give birth in Gaza every day without basic hygiene, necessities, fuel, water, anesthetic, drugs, blood products, and other supplies. As Malcolm said, healthcare access and quality is a social determinant of health. We learn, our students and those of us in the university learn a lot about social determinants of health, which are, according to the WHO, the non-medical factors that influence health outcomes. They are the conditions in which people are born, grow, work, live, and age. This is the direct definition of the WHO. And the wider set of forces and systems shaping the conditions of daily life and death. These forces and systems include economic policies and systems, development agendas, social norms, social policies, and political systems. Now, some critique the social determinants of health as a depoliticized framework for understanding health inequalities, highlighting instead the structural determinants of health which enshrine and encode structural racism, white supremacy, neoliberal capitalism, cis heteronormativity, and other forms of oppression and othering. And it is in Gaza that we see this relationship in horrifying relief. Destruction of a healthcare system is an act of genocide, as South Africa has argued. Once the healthcare system is destroyed, injuries and illnesses can't be treated, primary care cannot be delivered, chronic conditions cannot be managed. Public health systems, programs like immunization cannot be maintained and delivered, and famine cannot be managed. In other words, not only well-being, but the conditions of life become almost impossible to sustain. Azuz's very first sentence of Erased City is, "If it was not Palestine, it would be different. But it is Palestine." Silence. Silence is what our governments, our universities, our medical associations want in the face of the destruction of Gaza's physical and social healthcare infrastructures, which are conditions of life. Silence is what the claim that criticism of the Israeli state and its policies is anti-Semitic is intended to achieve. We cannot and will not be silent. Thank you.
Thank you, Kendra, for providing us with that context. We turn next to Dr. Yapenge to speak about his experiences of working in Gaza. And in doing so, we're very grateful to Janine Farrell, who's with us tonight from Health Workers Alliance for Palestine, for introducing us to both Dr. Gay and to Dr. Nala, our next speaker. Yapeng is a Chinese, Canadian, and first-generation immigrant. He's a family physician and resident physician in public health and preventative medicine. He received a Master's of Public Health degree in Health and Social Behavior at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health and he is a board member of the Canadian Public Health Association, Canadian Doctors for Medicare and Humanity Auxilium. He's passionate about tackling health and social inequities by addressing the social and broader determinants of health, including anti-racism and decolonizing work and practice in medical education. Peng has worked for various global health organizations, including the World Health Organization in the headquarters in Geneva, Switzerland, and the Population Health Research Institute in Hamilton, Ontario. In 2020, he was Canada's official youth delegate to the 73rd World Health Assembly and the 58th Pan American Health Organization Directing Council. It's a pleasure to welcome you.
Thank you, Malcolm. I am very grateful and humbled to share time and space with all of you. I think there's a few things that I wanted to touch on, and hopefully I can stay within our time limit. I think it's important to position myself and how I show up for solidarity work. I'll also touch on anti-Palestinian racism, this climate of silencing and reprisal that we're seeing in academic institutions, workplaces, medical schools. And how do we continue to center the people of Palestine, the people of Gaza that are experiencing an ongoing genocide, experiencing the unimaginable horror of the crime of all crimes, the crime against humanity, the crime against our collective humanity. I, as was mentioned, am Chinese Canadian. I received this thing that is Canadian citizenship when I was in grade 5 because my parents passed a test. And had to move forward recognizing the privileges and the opportunities, but the obligation of what that carries, knowing the history of and the ongoing genocide of Indigenous peoples in Canada, to benefit from the graves of Indigenous children here on settler colonial land, so-called Canada. And I credit so much of my learning and unlearning to residential school survivors because unfortunately and fortunately it took until for me to get to undergraduate studies in Hamilton, which is very close to a place called Six Nations, learning from Haudenosaunee scholars and clinicians and community members about residential schools, about the 60 Sćwp, and hearing and learning about the outcomes of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action and what it means to bear witness in that context, what it means to carry my identity as a Canadian that is complicit, and how do I lean into that discomfort of bearing witness, and how do I do that lifetime work and commitment and obligation and a commitment to dismantling these oppressive structural systems that dehumanize people that I care about, people that have taught me so much. Then it becomes an obligation. And so for the past 10 years, I have been in this space of Indigenous health, primarily First Nations in the context of Hamilton and Six Nations, and Inuit in the context of Ottawa, Algonquin and Anishinaabe territory, because Inuit have been displaced from the north for medical apartheid reasons of being treated in the south in Ottawa, and having worked in the context of Nunavut with Inuit. And it's from that experience both as a clinician, but also from this understanding of what it means to work in public health, what it means to be a scholar and a practitioner of public health, to understand structural determinants of health at its core, what causes disease and suffering in this world, and that of the attainment of health and well-being is directly and fundamentally impacted by those structural determinants, including the impacts of colonization. And so when we can understand these things, we're better able to fundamentally address racial health inequities and social inequities. And I think being unable to talk about those things in the context of Palestine is not only horrific and appalling, but we leave out the fundamental analysis of being a practitioner in public health, that of what is the elephant in the room, what is the structural reasons for why Palestinian health, why are people dehumanized in this world. And it's from that framing that I had the opportunity to learn more about Zionist settler colonialism and its material manifestations on Palestinian bodies and people in occupied West Bank, in the Gaza Strip, in Israel proper, in the Palestinian diaspora around the world. And it became my privilege and opportunity to reckon with my own privilege yet again of being non-Palestinian and being able to learn about Palestinian health at an academic institution like Harvard University, and then also visit occupied West Bank and to visit places where my friends who are Palestinian do not even have the privilege to visit themselves, where their family have been exiled. And I've been thinking about how the ways in which I've been taught by my father and family members is we know where we come from. I think about how my father has brought me back to rural China in a place called Shandong, where he showed me the places that he grew up, he studied, and where our family has roots for generations. And how something so simple and straightforward is systematically denied, erased, stripped from people in this world, including First Nations, Inuit, Métis people in Canada, and Palestinian people in Palestine. And that is the framing in which I think more and more people are understanding the issue and the topic of Palestine. And now we're seeing people experience the worst forms of reprisals. I was immediately suspended without a conversation from the University of Ottawa's Faculty of Medicine, and immediately brought into a virtual meeting room with senior leadership of the Canadian Medical Association for my social media posts related to health and human rights for Palestine and Palestinians. And none of those accusations of unprofessionalism, of anti-Semitism, of inflammatory or hateful rhetoric stood the test of time. For doctors, for health professionals, for people that work in the space of caring for other human beings to label social media posts that stand for health and human rights for Palestine as anti-Semitic, as hateful, as inflammatory, in of itself is hateful and discriminatory. It is rooted in anti-Palestinian racism to dehumanize Palestinians and their narratives. And it is exactly this kind of rhetoric that has allowed this genocide to happen now for 6 months. It's interesting that an experience like that happened to me in November by the University of Ottawa and by the Canadian Medical Association to not even be considered bullying or harassment. And I was reflecting on how just a few days ago I was at the Governor General's residence in Rideau Hall, which was such a strange experience because this is the heart of Canadian colonialism. But who holds that post is an Inuit woman. And for her office to recognize what I went through in November as online abuse and racism and hate, I think was vindicating and spoke volumes as to how much we need to hold the complexities of what is happening in present day, this reality that doesn't seem like a reality I want to live in. But it's from that experience that I've been able to deepen my relationships and connections with people that care about me and support me, and connect with humanitarian healthcare workers who have been centering the people in Gaza. Because all of this anti-Palestinian racism, dehumanizing rhetoric is a distraction from what we should all be doing, is putting an end to the genocidal violence in Gaza that is rooted in the Zionist settler colonial project that started from the ongoing Nakba that began in 1948. And having visited Gaza and provided what I could provide as a primary care physician and bringing in medications and supplies, there's no other conclusion that I have than this being an ongoing genocide, because of the systematic withholding of food, clean water, decent shelter, which over 2 million people in the Gaza Strip has been systematically denied. And the systematic targeting of healthcare infrastructure and healthcare workers is unprecedented. And I think we're kind of tired of hearing such a word. I think we're tired of hearing it in the context of this genocide. But the humanitarian healthcare workers that I've spent time with, who have worked in many other contexts, more so than I have, we've never seen anything like this, where the Israeli forces actually directly target hospitals, make them completely non-functional, and actually single out doctors and nurses in scrubs to detain them, arrest them, to execute them point blank in front of their patients because they refuse to leave their patients, because they refuse to leave their patients in the operating room because they're still operating on them, and they get shot. And so when this is happening to our healthcare workers in a different part of the world, and we're not allowed, we're not able to speak about it in its actual terms, we lose our own humanity. And so I think we have to continue to do what we can when we are in the belly of the beast of these colonial projects, and recognize the immense privilege that we have to call out these atrocities, to recognize our power as people. When I think in this world, what these structural, like these systems and structures of oppression and racism and colonialism and like imperialism, neoliberalism, like tell us that we are powerless as people. But this is fundamentally not true when we look at any civil rights movement, any movement for self-determination and liberation in this world. It is hard fought. And to do everything that we can as individuals is something, but if we do it as communities of care that support and back each other, and to know that there's no taking out one person from said movement because it is a social movement, it is a collective, then we are more powerful than we could ever imagine. And so I am so humbled to share this time and space with you and continue to center the people of Gaza. I'll end by sharing, because I do want to address, I think what we're talking about is like the short-term, medium-term, long-term impacts on health for Palestinians in Gaza. And it's so hard to talk about medium or long-term consequences when people continue to die every day from the bombs. It's hard to talk about the future. But the future, as Dr. Ghassan Abu Sita mentioned just a few days ago, is the future, and tomorrow is a Palestinian day. Because the people of Palestine will ultimately free themselves. We are the ones trapped. We are the ones trapped by these systems of silencing and fear of reprisal. And to recognize how do we decolonize health or healthcare or any kind of like fundamental shift in meaningful action towards decolonization, we have to decolonize ourselves first. We have to decolonize our own minds and how we actually show up properly in solidarity with Palestinian people that are struggling for their liberation and self-determination and basic human rights, basic human rights. So I'll leave it there, I think.
Thank you, Wapi. Next, we turn to Dr. Nala to speak to the long-term impacts on the healthcare system and the people of Gaza. Dr. Nala is a psychiatry resident. She's a Syrian-Canadian third-year psychiatry resident in Ontario, Canada, and is passionate about mental health, equity, and healthcare access. She has a particular interest in cultural psychiatry and advocates for intersectionality in mental health care. She uses social media platforms as a tool for advocacy and awareness, particularly for what is happening in Palestine. And I must say that, when I watched Dr. Nala's Instagram account and just was absolutely infected with her passion and her advocacy work, and it's an absolute pleasure to invite her to speak to us.
Thank you so much. Just want to make sure the mic is okay before I start. So, like my colleague, Yipeng kind of gave context to who he is and himself here today, I'll do the same. I was born in Syria to Syrian parents, and they migrated here, and similar to Yipeng's parents, had passed a test and had to meet many criteria and acquire a number of points to become skilled migrants and come to this country and be settlers on stolen land. Myself as well, settler on stolen land. I'm not Palestinian. I want to make sure I say that because what I'm sharing today, even though, yes, I'm from a country very close to Palestine, and yes, my entire life has been free Palestine, like from the minute I was born and every day of my life, I still cannot speak from the perspective of a Palestinian. Everything I'm sharing today and everything I share, I try to take from my Palestinian colleagues, from scholars, from add more context or add my thoughts on it, but it's their knowledge that I'm sharing with you today. It's not mine. I just want to make sure I make that very clear. And also that just because I'm not Palestinian, it doesn't mean that that labor is always to fall on Palestinians. And I think Jada reminded us of that when we were meeting, to say that it doesn't always have to be Palestinians on a panel speaking to the world, talking about what they've experienced. They've been doing that for over 76 years. They've been doing that. So it's also on us to bear witness and to highlight what happens to Palestinians, what has happened to Palestinians, and advocate for them. So I want to share a quote from a film by Dr. Samah Jabir, who is a psychiatrist in the West Bank. If you haven't watched it, you should. It's called Beyond the Front Lines. One of the quotes that she said is, "The more that Israelis breathe, the more that Palestinians choke." I wanted to start off with that because my lens is a mental health lens, and mental health for me is not just your one aspect of you, it's your whole being. It's very holistic. However, it's not in the way that I guess the Western holistic definition is. And I wanted to break down what that means to choke, what that feeling of choking means from what I learned from her and again from Palestinian colleagues. And I want to break it down into very different categories of how the Zionist project, the Zionist entity, the occupation, this genocide and the previous genocides, what they've done in all these different areas to persistently keep their foot on the neck of a Palestinian, to keep them choking and to erase all these aspects of their being, and in turn impact their mental well-being and their overall health. So the first thing I want to mention is land. Similar to our indigenous, the indigenous teachings about this connection to land and being of the land, Palestinians talk about that incessantly. They talk about that so much, that this connection to land it's in your body, it's really in every fiber of your body, of your being. And what has consistently been shown from Palestinians is this removal of land is connected to like an inner death. Like you see an olive tree uprooted or burned and you feel it in your body, in your soul. You're being harmed directly as a Palestinian. And I think that colonizers and individuals who colonize and take land know that. They know how deeply connected and how intertwined the survival of indigenous communities are to land. And even if you don't directly harm a person, if you harm their land, you harm their olive trees, you harm their farms, you harm their animals, you harm anything on their land, you are directly harming them. That is a form of a slow genocide. And this was so exemplified by a young child in Gaza now, during this genocide, who was walking by a field of olive trees that he said, these are my family's olive trees. We had hundreds of olive trees here, and he's walking by. He's probably 8. I'm sure some of you have seen his videos. He's a child. And he's saying, there were so many here, and we have to burn the wood of these olive trees to live, to cook, to do anything. We have no fuel, so we're burning our own trees. It's such a form of humiliation and awfulness to do that to a people who are so connected to olive trees. We have to do that because we're going to die. We can't survive. And he's walking past it, and he's devastated. And that connection doesn't have to be necessarily taught over decades or years. He's 8, and he knows that. And that's happening right now. That's been happening for decades. So that's the first thing I want to talk about, is this connection to land, and removal of land is a really, really form of mental destruction, of mental harm. The other thing we talked about, and Jada mentioned, is this cultural and traditional type of harm that has been happening to Palestinians. And one specific thing that I want to highlight, because I feel like I said, nothing I'm saying is new. I'm really just disseminating information that has been said before, but just trying to contextualize everything. But this idea of stealing things that are very much Palestinian and labeling them as Israeli. And that is it's not a unique thing to Palestine, but it's a very, very common thing. I'm sure you've seen it so many times on social media where, a thobe, which is a traditional Palestinian dress, is labeled an Israeli dress, which is like, yeah, I've seen that before. There was an event held where it was like an Israeli awareness or an Israeli event, and women were wearing thobes in that event, and it was to showcase Israel. Or the Israeli food that is now kind of the Palestinian food, obviously, originally, that it's kind of labeled Israeli. The theft of this culture, of this tradition, of these foods, of this is like, again, a form of harming individuals mentally and physically. Another aspect of this is preventing kind of community, preventing individuals in Palestine, occupied territories, and in Gaza from being able to meet in community and breathe. So I'm sure many of us have seen, even in a situation where an individual is murdered, they're directly attacked when they try to go into community to grieve the loss of that person, or to go to a ceremony for that person afterwards, so to pray for them, or however it looks, their funeral, whatever that is. That removal of that process, that community, again, is such a destruction of a person's mental well-being. They're not even allowed to grieve the losses that were enacted by that same group of individuals by Israel. So they're harmed directly by that murder, that loss of life. And then again, in their own process of grieving, which is such a communal thing for Palestinians, they're bombed, they're sniped, they're harmed, they're attacked. All of these things are so central to the well-being and this is like sustaining an entire community and a population. So the more and more that you remove them, the more and more that you punish people for congregating, for prayer, for funerals, the more and more that you make them, erase them from their own traditions and their cultures, it is demoralizing. And I'm not saying that it's succeeded or it's prevented Palestinians from sustaining themselves and continuing, but that is the intention. It's the intention to keep them from doing that so that they do not continue to perpetuate their culture. Another, reflection that I had when I was watching Dr. Sňneymuxw's documentary is that in so many realms of a person's life, and just for context, this was in the West Bank, not specifically Gaza, but in so many realms of one person's life, there is so much destruction. So in one person, they would have, for example, lost their brother. That their brother might have been sniped and murdered. Their other brother has been in detention for 20 years and has been tortured. They can see it through either visual imagery on TV or through photos, but they can never actually go see their other sibling. This one person, their mother, might be grieving so much and might be in such pain that they cannot communicate to their family. They can't even talk to them. They can't even engage anymore because their grief is so overpowering. They cannot manage all that has been happening to their family. Their dad might be working, on Israeli territory and might have to cross checkpoints every day and barely be at home with their family. So this is such a destruction of a person's being in every realm. So in their entire family, in their ability to seek education, in their ability to have a future, in their ability to simply survive. And I want to read another quote that Dr. Sňneymuxw wrote as well about this. Give me 1 second to find it. You know what, I'll just go on here. Because trauma in Palestine is so prevalent, there are overlapping ripples of traumatic grief. A young man is affected by expanding circles of injury. He lives in a refugee camp because his grandfather's home and land were seized. His mother has been preoccupied with chronic depression for 20 years following the arrest and torture of his older brother. His neighbor's home was recently demolished. His classmate was killed in a demonstration. With this background, how do we locate the source of his chest pain when medical causes have been ruled out? The overabundance of traumatic events in the environment make it difficult to establish etiology. The repetition of trauma is a challenge to treatment efforts. So again, because I'm using this mental health lens, there's also that physical and somatic experience of our mental health experiences. So it shows up in our bodies, it shows up in how we present ourselves, how we speak, it shows up everywhere really. And what she highlights there is this, how do I know that even, yes, I don't know that it's I do know that it's not a medical cause of chest pain. How do I know where this came from? Every moment of this person's life has been grief and trauma and dehumanization and humiliation and harm and destruction. And it's hard to pinpoint the location, the time, the source. It is all over. It is everywhere. Dr. Sňneymuxw is also one of the people that coined the term that there is no PTSD. There's no post to the trauma of the individuals in Palestine. It is from birth. It is still now. And one thing I remember mentioning, I'll switch over back to Gaza, is that when people talk about Gaza and say, it was so beautiful before this destruction, this most recent destruction, we should say, they say that, but we know that in the background of that, they were still being starved in essence, right? There was still a limitation on how much water each person could eat, how much food they could have, electricity per day. There were still kids learning in dark rooms every single day because they were cutting off electricity to Gaza whenever they wanted to. There's still an occupied territory. But they know what it feels like to be bombarded. They know what it feels like to have their home demolished. They know what it feels like to have other things happen to them, that is relief. There is no post. There's never a post. It's constant. It's continuous. It never ends. And if the crimes and the aggression is just a lesser aggression than a complete bombardment and destruction, they show that in this beautiful light and say, look at how our life used to be. I wish we could go back to that. And we would hate a minute of their life in Gaza before this genocide. We would hate. None of us. We would not be able to tolerate what happens to them. So there is really no post, and I think that is a very, privileged way to look at things, especially as a person trained in the West, that we have to also look at how we diagnose, how we look at mental health conditions as well when we look at populations like the Palestinian population, the indigenous communities, and just the indigenous population too. I don't know how much time I have left. I'm sorry. Do I have more time? Okay, I will quickly want to mention something that was brought up in our meeting, kind of discussing what we're going to talk about today, and it was this idea of feeling like when you want to talk about what's happening in the world or the sort of things that are happening in the world, and you feel like your body won't let you say it, it won't let you communicate it, it won't let you articulate it. You might not have experienced this, but after it was mentioned, I spoke with a few of my friends and colleagues, and it's actually quite common, this idea of your body not even letting you utter the horrible things that either have happened to you or that you've witnessed. Again, I'm speaking about Dr. Sňneymuxw, but so much because I asked for her insights on this, and I wanted to share with you what she said. And she told me that for the Palestinian population especially, there has been so much physical repression. There has been so much silencing physically. So being sent to jail, literally being killed, literally having if you speak up, having this threat of your daughters or the women in your family being harmed, of you losing your home, etc., of you never having to be able to seek higher education, get a job, anything. So that physical repression also manifests, systemic repression also manifests physically in this inability to actually utter the words because you know that you will be harmed for it, so your body won't let you, and it's a form of self-protection, self-preservation. Another thing is that when Palestinians have screamed out loud, and all of us in this room, we're all here for a reason. We've all, I hope, seen videos of what they've told us and seen their posts and seen what they've shared with us. They've been screaming this to the world for so long and met with even more support to their occupier, even more support to the people that are colonizing and occupying them and harming them. At what point can you keep screaming and yelling, this is what's happening to me, this is what's happening to me, this is what's happening to me? It is also a physical manifestation of that too, that inability to utter those words. So it's not just falling on deaf ears. People are listening and they're like, actually, yeah, we're gonna continue doing that to you. It's an experience that, again, Indigenous communities here will very much relate to and Palestinians can relate to. One last thing I wanted to mention as well is, so as a resident working here in Ontario and hearing what happened to Yupeng and hearing what happened to so many of my other colleagues with suspensions and with other, being called into offices to talk about things because they posted Free Palestine, like ridiculous things like that, it will make you feel like you are the wrong one, like you're the problem. It's you that is, I don't want to use like this, like I don't like the word crazy, but you feel that way. I'm sure many of us feel that way navigating the world, thinking like, why does no one care? Like, why am I feeling this way? And everyone else is just moving along with their lives. And I hope that being in this room today, and I'm sure other events you've attended, you recognize in this community that you're not. And I hope that, from also hearing from our stories and from, what we've talked about today, that it shows you that you're not. And one thing that I also want to mention is through the social media posts that I've posted, where I very clearly speak directly at healthcare professionals and say, what are you doing? Like, how are you okay with this? How do you show up every single day at work and talk about football games and Taylor Swift? There is a genocide happening, and I'll do that. And then over time, over the last 6 months, even though it should have happened a long time ago, many physicians that work with me have messaged and said, hey, what can I do? And it's happening. So I hope that also gives you that glimmer of hope that you keep doing what you're doing and show up in these communities and these spaces, and you're literally not crazy. Like, I know that part of the mental well-being is so heavy for us because we feel like we're just losing our minds watching this. And you're not, and you're human, and it's natural to feel that way when you're witnessing such a level of atrocity that should just never, ever be happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nala. And you made some remarks that take us into our last speaker before we have a closing session. So the onslaught in Gaza has had a very particular impact on humanitarian efforts in the Strip. Israeli imposed closure on the movement of goods and people to and from Gaza dates back to 1991, when Israel cancelled the general exit permit for Palestinians in the occupied territories. This policy was initially temporary, but eventually developed into a permanent administrative measure in March of 1993. And as a result, Gazans are reliant on the support provided by the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian refugees to the agency. But Dr. Seta has kindly, in the moments before this meeting, once we realized that we had the technical glitches, been able to prepare a very short video, and we're going to watch it now. Thank you.
Hey, right. I am now. Good morning. Today is the World Health Day. The theme of this year is My Health, My Rights. I am now in Gaza. You can see behind me, hands on the street, people living on the street. Their right to their health is totally damaged. It's very important for us to make sure the right to health will maintain, so people have a right to healthy life and a healthy living. We are doing everything. However, the entire environment does not allow us to achieve my rights, my health. So you can see from my behind very clearly. It's important in the day of the World Health Day, we should remember the rights to health is our fundamental rights. This is a UNRWA Health Center in South Sudan in Gaza. UNRWA continues to provide primary health care through 7 health centers now, together with the 70 to 80 health quality shelters. They provide a daily consultation on the medical issues, around 25,000 people. They provide vaccination, so far 65,000 people, as well as care for the mothers, they care for the people with diabetes, hypertension, and they care for the oral health and everything. UNRWA is a lifeline in Gaza and provides very important life-saving primary health care.
Well, we'll be sure to convey our thanks to Dr. Seta for that short video clip. So it's now my great pleasure to welcome Adol Iskander to facilitate a panel discussion with our speakers and make summary and closing remarks, and for me to step back and listen. Adol Iskander is an associate professor of global communication at Simon Fraser University and graduate chair in the School of Communication. He is the author, co-author, and editor of several works, including Egypt in Flux, Essays on an Unfinished Revolution, Al Jazeera, the story of the network that is rattling governments and redefining modern journalism, Edward Said, A Legacy of Emancipation and Representation, and Mediating the Arab Uprisings and Media Evolution on the Eve of the Arab Spring. Adol's work deals with media, identity, and politics. His engaged participatory research includes supporting knowledge productions through scholarly digital publishing, and his community research agenda involves showcasing local grassroots participatory creative production by communities in the Middle East to confront the rise of extremism. I met Adol some months ago and have been involved with him in a number of projects since then, and it's always been an inspiration to work with you, Adol, and it's a joy to hand over to you. Thank you.
Adol has let me just say something before he dives into facilitating. We've just heard an enormous amount of, troubling is not the word, but painful information. And I just want to remind each of you while you're sitting here to just give yourself a breath. And if that feels good, give yourself another. It is a privilege to be able to breathe. So before we dive into a panel discussion, it might help for each of you to just come back to your own bodies if you're feeling a bit flooded.
Thank you you so much, Jada. I have to say it's very difficult to commence with this discussion, but if you don't mind, I'll take the opportunity of having the microphone for just a brief moment to express our heartfelt gratitude to everyone who made this event possible. And I have to tell you, it took a lot of heavy lifting to bring an event like this to SFU. So our immense gratitude to the unsung heroes, Kylie Broderick, the coordinator Rachel C. from the program, Later Studies program for racial support. Kendra for doing such an incredible job in the final hours. There were many instances where this event looked like it wasn't going to come to fruition. So Kendra, thank you. The coordinators of the idea, Malcolm and Travis. I'm sorry I'm withholding titles. I'm sorry, there are lots of doctors in our midst, PhDs, but if you don't mind, but thank you both, Malcolm and Travis. I'll say really quickly that the reason why I share this is because while we struggle to decolonize spaces in Palestine, the struggle continues here as well. There are, of course, silver linings. Instances like what Dr. Wellbeing shared about stepping into the Governor General's residence to find that perhaps the spaces is being reclaimed. But many of the spaces in which we are currently residing have a long way to go to be reclaimed. Just being able to get this theater was very, very difficult. Largely because apparently this audience poses a security risk or a threat to the world. This is a clear message that there's no security risk here. There's only a risk to those who want to continue to genocide peoples around this world, whether that be here on Salish territories or in Palestine and everywhere in between. So, the truth will set you free, but the truth requires both a voice, a witness, and a space. And luckily, we've got all three here today, so I thank you all. I think as Kendra said, I feel like an imposter here because as a non-healthcare professional, I do kind of fake being a physician sometimes. I mentioned that I come from like 4 generations of physicians, and I have to become a PhD to be able to get away with faking being a doctor. But I will say that one of the things that I recall from the experience of living with physicians my whole life is the importance of being able to find one's vitals, right? The idea that, okay, is there an emergency? The very few things I know to do is to find a pulse, check blood pressure, see if someone's breathing, right? And the one thing that I'm always thinking about is where one finds the pulse. I remember distinctly, like the ulnar and the radial, pulse, where to find it. Dig deep, go behind the pisiform bone, like look for that pulse, right? And the one thing that I've been thinking as of late is the extent to which those who remain silent, I understand remaining silent on the current circumstances has a lot to do with the perceived risk and threat to one's well-being, especially in a climate of complete erasure and complete dehumanization as we've listened thus far. But for those who remain steadfastly supportive of the campaign of genocide, the question I'd like to pose to them is, where is their pulse? Can they find the pulse? Because really, this is no longer about, whether or not you support people's rights to self-determination. It's about people's rights to literally exist. I go back to something that Edward Said said some time ago, years ago now, is that we're being told by the Israelis that we don't really exist, but we are there. There are villages, and there were villages. There are cities, and there were cities. There was a Palestinian society before 1948, unlike some PC ministers like to think. I'll remind you. So at any rate, but Edward Said says we do exist. So in light of this desire and calculated intent, structurally and institutionally, to erase Palestinians from existence, their memories, their livelihood, everything that we've seen in Gaza, but things that are even more systematic, whereby the erasure of memory and the erasure of the right to grieve and mourn, as Dr. Mala said. Where do we go from here? And I wanted to open this up a little bit to explore some of the themes that I feel are very salient. And the first has to do with the right to procreate, bear children, and continue one's community. It comes as no surprise that as we think about the livelihood of Palestinians and their right to continue existing, I mean, just the circumstance today with the woman who had to leave, I hope she's okay. I know that she received ambulatory care, so hopefully she's okay. But to think about what it means to be a pregnant woman in Gaza today, I mean, I cannot believe how incredibly painful it must be to, and I've heard, and I'm sure all of you have too, stories of women having to undergo C-sections without anesthetic on basically floors that have not been sanitized. The likelihood of the risk to one's well-being and health is really quite shocking. And just before I walked into the auditorium today, my friend and colleague, the only Palestinian who teaches here at SFU, gifted me something, and I have to show it to you all, right? Okay. I'm going to hold this up. This is a t-shirt by Indigenous artist Phil Gray. I don't know if you see this, right? Do you see that? Okay. And you know, there is kind of I feel like there's a spiritual connection between this t-shirt and where we are today. It depicts it's a Salish artistic design that embodies a fetus, in fact, inside a watermelon, a Palestinian watermelon. So when we think about what it means to be able to bear children and continue one's legacy on land that is being dispossessed and erased, the connections are there. The umbilical cords that connect Palestinians to Gaza and to Palestine are the same umbilical cords that connect Salish peoples to the lands on which they reside. And if there's anything to take away from this message, especially Salia and Jada's message, is the fact that it does not matter how much effort, time, energy, resources, and money are marshaled to completely erase the people off the face of this earth. You can't do it. You cannot do it. And one of the things that is a cruel reminder to those intent on the complete annihilation of Palestinian life is that there are still 5 million Palestinians living on historic Palestinian land, and 15 million who live around the world, and billions of those who are in solidarity with Palestine today. So this message is not going to be erased, and these people will not be erased. So I'm sorry, I had to get that off my chest, okay? Now enough about me. I'm around, you guys are not. Okay, so I want to turn to Wellbeing. You said a lot of things that we rarely hear from healthcare practitioners. And And maybe it's because we are under the assumption that healthcare workers are designed and destined and trained to just do your job, right? Like, don't think about big picture. What does it mean to discuss like colonialism, apartheid? These are all perhaps abstractions. And so many of your peers and colleagues are not doing that. Is it by design? What is it about one's medical training, and what is it about your experience that has made you capable of seeing beyond the blind spots?
Thank you for the question. Simply put, it wasn't how I was trained, right? The people that helped train me, and many of whom are not clinicians, right? I credit my mentors and patients who are Inuit, who are Haudenosaunee, who have taught me so much of what it means to be Indigenous on stolen land and to be dehumanized in the context of Canada, to know that medical institutions and the system of knowledge of Western medicine in particular is extremely harmful and extractive and dehumanizes people and justifies things like slavery, justifies things like experimenting on Indigenous children and bodies to test the limits of nutrition, to sterilize people with uteruses so that they cannot have children in Canada, in the US. And so it was not how I was trained to enter medicine. And I think more and more people recognize the system of harm. And we think about medicine, Western medicine, as understanding disease and illness, as opposed to a true system of well-being and the attainment of health. And I think that's why I've also pivoted away from just medicine, right? Like, to think about population health and public health, thinking about the structural determinants, then we have to acknowledge the impacts of capitalism and colonialism and imperialism on people's bodies and communities. And I was thinking, like, I was reflecting on why, I didn't share more about my time at the Tal Satan Clinic, which was mentioned in the video, is because those are the symptoms. I think about like the patients that I looked after that, like this clinic that was just mentioned, when I went to it, didn't have antibiotics. And we brought antibiotics, started using them, and so many children and were like forcibly starved and dehydrated, and all we could offer them was IV fluid. And and outbreaks of hepatitis A, conditions like rickets disease, children that were walking before and not walking anymore, children that should be walking at like 12 months of age, 14 months of age are not walking because of malnutrition. It's not super helpful to talk about like those symptoms when we know the root causes are the system of apartheid, the structural oppression. So we have to name, like, we have to get the diagnosis right.
To Dr. Al, you mentioned, the ongoing, you mentioned a lot of really important points from the willingness for Palestinians to lose land, to lose culture, the appropriation of all of everything, really, the breaking of their spirit, the killing of their hope. And you talked about ongoing trauma, of course, among indigenous communities that have been systematically genocided. We talk about intergenerational trauma. As a practitioner, and I don't know to what extent you've really sort of contemplated how to address this, but how do you begin to deal with these types of circumstances? How do you break that? I mean, we're talking about 2.3 million Palestinians in Gaza who've been subjected to unspeakable, devastating horrors that are maybe a survival home, as you said, and perhaps a lot of those narratives may not come out because of the forced silence and the implicit self-censorship out of fear and other reasons. So how do you begin to address this?
Okay, just gonna check if this, yeah, okay, it's working. I don't know how to address it, but I'm gonna share some of my thoughts on that. I've been very privileged to be able to work with people in Gaza right now. It's very informal. I haven't gone like Yipeng has gone, but being able to do virtual care with patients there and individuals there. And I think there are still, I hope this is received well. I want to explain as well as I can. There's still a humanness to individuals that live within or under an occupation, who lived numerous bombardments. So the average individual in Gaza has lived through 4 to 5 bombardments in their life already. There's a humanness to them still, that they're intergenerational manifestations of this trauma. It's not just, it's similar to what we would see in an individual here, for example, or like an individual anywhere in the world. A lot of them might not say, oh, my trauma doesn't come from the bombing or the homes being demolished or anything like that. It comes from like what happened to me as a child by this person, or what I witnessed between my parents, or the substance use that I got into. Like, again, just this sort of humanness that we see here, this natural reaction to generations of trauma that we see here in Canada and in North America. Although we know, obviously, in the context of being within an environment where you're being bombarded every few months or every year, and that obviously contributes. But if the question is about this intergenerational manifestation, it's very similar. It's in individuals developing abusive patterns in relationships and witnessing that within your family and being victim to that yourself, whether you experience it directly or you see it in your family. Individuals falling through substance use disorders, other forms of assault and abuse as a child. Like, this is something that comes up with the people I talk to right now. They're experiencing a genocide. They're being starved, and that's the stuff they're talking to me about. So it shows up in that way, and the way that we would manage it, as best as we can, is education. So teaching individuals about where that can come from, how generations after generation can manifest a trauma that happened that didn't actually directly happen to them. It might have happened to their parents or their grandparents, and it shows up in these different ways with each generation. And then after education is sort of this process of safely sharing and discussing and processing. Again, I say safely, it's really hard to do that virtually, but safely processing it. And then obviously looking at the manifestations in themselves, in their relationships, in their function and things like that. But I'm a Western trained psychiatry resident. I am not an expert, and I should not be the person that teaches individuals about this. Like Yipeng mentioned, a lot of my learning about what it means to be a good physician came from like my mom's mom and her traditional healing and what she does when people are not feeling well, from learning about traditional healers in South Africa, from learning about traditional healers really in the world. That's what has shaped me and made me a better person as a physician. And I want to give one example just to also kind of add on to the question about like how it looks like in practice. So I want to give the example of a time when I was seeing a patient on call. And if you don't know what call is, we work for 24 hours straight. So we don't stop working. We are on call for 24 hours. So we could be working from 1 hour to the final hour nonstop. And I was on call one day, and I was on my probably 18th hour, and I was not my best self, and I was not a good physician. And I know that. We're not good at that time. And I saw a patient who was Indigenous and was expressing multiple concerns, and I could hear it in myself, and I could feel it in myself that I was so resistant to coming out of that very rigid way of questioning and asking questions and getting to the bottom of what I needed to get to in that moment, which is, do you need to be admitted or not? And that's so unfortunate that that's the way I was taught. That is, am I admitting you or am I not admitting you? And that's all I need to figure out today. And I don't have space and room to give you the time that you are owed in this room with me today. And I could feel it, and it was so frustrating. And it was something that I needed to, I've since reflected on, and I'm trying to work on. But I could sense it in the patient too, and saying, but but this, but I want, and I'm thinking like, okay, I just need to figure out what I'm doing right now with this individual, with this patient. And it's challenging that. It's recognizing that we are so flawed and that we're not doing what the communities that we're serving need, and it's learning from them to address things like this intergenerational representation of trauma, the manifestations of symptoms, and how we can best help them as well.
Thank you. One of the things that you highlight, I mean, this last point about the inability to deliver what you think is needed, and recognizing the scarcity in resources and capacities, individuals. Of course, we, given the incredible sort of mental health incapacitation that we have here in Canada, we can only imagine what communities in Palestine, especially in Gaza, are having to deal with. But the other side of this is the extent to which these crises themselves are being discussed and made and rendered public. And one of the points that you raised, Jada, about the importance of witnessing is critical in my mind, because as we've seen, this is not just a war or genocide against Palestinians, but it is also a war and genocide against those who are witnessing. We've seen the systematic, destruction of any and all facilities where stories can be told. This has been the deadliest conflict for journalists in contemporary history. Some say that the more journalists and reporters and narrators and storytellers have been killed in Gaza than all of the Second World War. Some of these numbers are shocking. And the same is true of attacks, systematic attacks, perhaps not killings, but at least threats to those who, and as you described, some of which you've been subjected to, that witnessing is prohibited. So what do we do about ensuring that this space to witness remains available for us? And more importantly, how do we ensure that others take that very difficult, it seems difficult to them, but not to all of us, the decision to decide to witness as well? Those who are in your midst, in your surrounding spaces, who are still quiet, silent, on the fence, on the edge, trying to figure out where they are vis-a-vis this, this genocide, how do we ensure that they come along on this journey of reckoning and representing?
Yeah, I think it's not, when we're thinking about how to change models work, how do we bring about change? I think we don't focus on the naysayers at 6 months into a genocide. I think we focus on growing our movement and growing our strengths. And I also think we learn from each other. I've been told a great many times in the last 6 months that it's because I've put people in uncomfortable situations and asked them to speak or asked them to come and hold my hand at an action or a rally, and putting them there, asking for their time and their presence has allowed them to see that it actually feels better. And that's made change. And I think very tender acts bring about change. So my mom wasn't comfortable talking about Palestine. She just wasn't. It was too much. And the too much came from her own experience through residential school and harm, witnessing harm against children, being harmed as a child. And so the way I actually engaged her was to sit with her and make signs for an action. And I would, we cut the paper or the cardboard. Making signs is totally my love language. I love it. So I would write it out in pencil, and then I would sort of slide it across the table. And my mom, I strategically gave her the ones that were more Indigenous focused, like No Peace on Stolen Land. And so she would read it, and then she would yeah, that's really true. And so a night of sitting together and making signs actually opened it up. and she could see through the messaging that this is the same. And she just agreed, like she was having her own conversation, and that cracked it open. So I think that actually the bearing witness is one thing, and I'll just say there's something, and I think admittedly, I'll just speak for myself, I have hardened in ways that I am not comfortable with, that I absolutely reject Zionism. But it turns out I often can't find humanity in Zionists, and I will shut them out in ways forgetting their humanity, and therefore, how can we expect them to find that pathway if they have no place? So, and I don't make it my business to go and talk to Zionists. I actually, I don't have patience for that, but I think some people do. And so that's when I'm like, your cousins are freaking out, go talk to them. We have those responsibilities. Like that, I'm not going to be that guy. But I think some of the tenderness and also recognizing our own shortcomings is really important in these spaces. And then I actually want to speak to this piece about intergenerational trauma, that I come from a people who have lived through trauma, and I experience their trauma through their parenting, but also my own traumas stem out of that. And I don't think of myself as somebody who, it just is part of my story. That's just that. And what I do put a lot of emphasis on in myself and in my family and in my people is the intergenerational resilience. And what are the social determinants of resilience? And we build on those. And those cannot be medicalized, pathologized, that actually it's the land that teaches us what our survival is and where we belong and who we belong to. And so, I've learned most profoundly about my strengths and felt most cared for in a canoe and with my people and singing our songs. And actually, those seem like they might just be sort of cultural activities. And they are. But, pre-contact those cultural activities, we didn't say, let's go do cultural activities. Let's go get in a canoe. We were just like, let's go to so-and-so's house. And that was a cultural activity. But actually returning to that is some of the intergenerational healing for the intergenerational trauma. And so I don't know how to say this without swearing. So if I offend people through swearing, some of the things is to get the fuck out of the way, right? Colonial structures, get out of the way. And people in high positions of power, get the fuck out of the way. We know what we need.
So my next question is actually to Malcolm, who is kind of sitting to my left, but also keeping a low profile. As a specialist in health strategy, policy, chronic disease management, and someone who looks at healthcare systems, can you tell us a little bit about how you view the current situation in Gaza? I mean, if this genocide were to come, in hopeful terms, come to a standstill today, which of course there are very few signs to suggest that, what would it take for, I'm not suggesting for services to return to what they were, which was already extremely scarce, but what will it take for healthcare services to be functional enough to be able to support life after having described the intent of Israel to render Gaza uninhabitable? What will it take to make it habitable again? What is it that we must do as collectives out here in the West to support the potential reconstitution of a healthcare system in Gaza?
Wow, that's a big question.
Sorry.
You know, when I watched the NBC interview with Muhammad and his soup kitchen, I was riveted to the spot. It's a great video. It sort of shows all the activity going around, the hundreds, if not thousands, of people coming to get their soup. I think there were 4 or 5 of these very, very large pots of soup cooking away. And I think, Adil, that's the doorway. The doorway is to find the resilience within the peoples who have survived, who will survive, who have always survived, and to allow them to lead us in how to support them. And they will show us the way because they are surviving. Of course, there will be enormous demands on providing acute care, of trying to stem the starvation, of trying to get emergency aid to pregnant people who are suffering with anemia, pregnant people who are starving, and we know that we need to rapidly make interventions because the children that will be born will have such a bad start in life. So I'm not putting aside the need for acute care and for acute interventions. But yes, as I said, it's one of a few videos I've seen, of a few pictures I've seen, a few representations I've seen of resilience. And it really gives one hope. It really reminds one that people are in solidarity with one another, that they are in support of one another, and that the narrative that we have been provided, which is that because 60% of the people voted for Hamas, that everybody is a Hamas supporter and everybody is sort of painted with the same brush. So we need to look to the people, and we need to do that in our own country as well.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I'm going to add a few details on the soup kitchen. Since the interview that you described, Malcolm, the soup kitchen has received a tremendous amount of support from around the world, and they've been able to start 4 additional soup kitchens. So there are a couple in the north, one in Gaza City and one in South Gaza. The one in South Gaza is an all-women run operation. So it's really an incredible work. I couldn't help but think of what you described, Dr. Nala, about the extent to which Palestinians mourn the loss of their not only their landscape, but their trees and their agriculture and their connection to these spaces. And one of the accounts that I'll never forget from the Al-Madoun family who run the soup kitchen is the description of how, because there's literally no fuel in Gaza, that they have to forage for dying or almost dead branches of olive trees to use them for fuel, and then having to sometimes cut the live olive trees to use them for fuel to be able to warm up food to eat. And that was really devastating to read. But I just wanted to kind of remind us of how important it is to give back. So when we ask ourselves, what can we do to support these local community-based initiatives that, and in fact, the Madoun family, I think, lost about 23 members of their own family in the bombings throughout the past 6 months. So I would strongly suggest that you support this as a QR code for it, but also to recognize what we've discussed in relation to UNRWA. Kendra mentioned the historical context of the Nakba and the continuous ethnic cleansing of Palestinians from the land. And UNRWA is a product of the original intent to provide services for Palestinians as refugees. Well, what happens if this refugee community never ceases to be refugees? Never ceases to, I mean, the structural system is designed to create perpetual and perennial dependency on the part of Palestinians. And that dependency means that the moment that you pull the plug, all is gone. And so the continuation of support for UNRWA is absolutely vital. You know, member states of the UN contribute money, and we've all heard about the severing of funding, at least briefly, or the pausing. But the vast majority of really impactful funding that can replace those important resources that have been retracted comes from, you know, donors like all of us. So if you really mean business as far as trying to support Gazans to live on a day-to-day basis, if you are struggling with these images on a day-to-day basis, please genuinely consider donating for UNRWA. UNRWA is not only providing healthcare services, but also food to Palestinians in Gaza, but they are providing an education across many of the Palestinian occupied territories. UNRWA is essentially a lifeline for most Palestinians, not just in Gaza. So we don't have a QR code for that, but you can easily find UNRWA. So just wanted to put that out there. And then my last question is to Kendra. Tell us a little bit about what it means to be a labor scholar in light of what has been done to Palestinian life and labor. When we talk about labor exploitation and neoliberalism and capitalist structures and what they do to us here, what does it mean for labor in Palestine to be decimated at the hands of a military machine that in and of itself reproduces and is reproduced by labor systems here?
That's another big question, but I think it falls on actually really clearly from the points about the training of medical workers and the ways in which we're alienated, you know, in a sense from our own labor, right? And I don't necessarily mean that just in the kind of like capitalist Marxist sense, but alienated emotionally, alienated in an embodied way from the implications of the labor that we do, from seeing ourselves collectively rather than individually as workers, which is what our systems want us, and not understanding that the systems that we labor under, for example, that capitalism is always racial capitalism, is always implicated with colonialism, settler colonialism, and imperialism, but also that some of our strongest and proudest moments are when we come together as people who labor in diverse ways, to labor together for justice. And when we think about, I mean, my own family, you know, my grandfather, who was a German Jew, found refuge in Argentina, and, you know, when my family then settled on my father's side in Chile, and had to leave after the coup, you know, the dock workers in the UK prevented the warplanes from taking off to aid Pinochet in the same way that our dock workers are preventing, you know, munitions from being loaded, in the same way that our students and workers are coming together to block the infrastructure that provides the weapons and the logistics. So we're all workers, whether we're paid or not. Our labor matters, and our labor needs to be in the service of collective justice and liberation, in the face of systems that want us to labor just for money. So that's what I would say.
Ensuring that our labor does not go towards the continuation of I mean, this is convenient, right? So for those of you who are members of the SFU community, if you haven't already considered the extent to which our university is complicit in the continuation of genocide, apartheid, and occupation in Palestine, we encourage you to sign this petition. This is our way of mobilizing the institution that we have some agency within, or so we believe, to push back against this type of action. And of course, these actions exist everywhere, but as an SFU community, we are at the very least intent on changing this. And I wanted to take a moment to really acknowledge the remarkable work being done by students and staff across the university and across the city and across the country and across the world in changing all of this. So if you're a student here, there, or anywhere, those of you who are following this online, please give yourself a round of applause for the incredible work. Thank you for expanding our imagination. For those of us who believe that so little could be accomplished, a lot of that has changed. So we have to, unfortunately, vacate the room fairly soon, and that's because I didn't get out of the way. But I think what we do have an opportunity to do is to turn the mics back. Unfortunately, we won't be able to take questions, otherwise it will be very protracted, but we can all congregate outside if there's a moment for people to speak to some of our panelists. But I wanted to give the mic back to everyone here on the panel to maybe share some closing remarks before we head out. Do you want to start, Saanich?
I actually think I've said everything that I have to say, and so I'd really love to give the last word to the rest of our panelists.
Thank you. A lingering thought that I really wanted to share was just around when we talk about health in the context of Gaza, I really hope we can continue to think about the intersectional ways in which we need to move a free Palestine forward, recognizing who are made structurally vulnerable, who are made vulnerable in this world, who are also dehumanized in this world, also in the context of Palestine, who are not just Palestinian, but they're also like physically or non-physically disabled, people who struggle with severe mental health issues, people with chronic diseases, people who are older adults, like Palestinian men, like people who are so dehumanized in the context of Palestine, where we have to be talking about children always. We have to be talking about women. We have to be talking about people who are pregnant. And yes, their lives matter, but so do the people with severe mental health, chronic diseases, disabilities. And in this current situation, there has been a lot of attention put on the physical impacts of bombings, airstrikes, missile strikes, drone attacks. And this is important because this is what is maiming and killing people on a daily basis. But there's this whole hidden, and I hope it's not so hidden moving forward, wave of non-communicable diseases, chronic diseases, cancers that are going undiagnosed completely. Dr. Ben Thompson, who's a nephrologist based in Canada, who recently came back from Gaza, speaks on this well, that there's no way to diagnose cancer now. Like, MRIs are completely destroyed, all of them. All the CT scanners have been destroyed except for one at the European Gaza hospital. And it's missing a part, and we're waiting on approvals from Israel to get that part. So this is for an imaging diagnosis. There's no way to get a tissue diagnosis for cancer because to get a sample, you have to get that tissue read by a pathologist. The pathologists in Palestine have been killed with their families. The pathology lab, the major one in the north at the Al-Shifa medical complex, is destroyed. So there's no way to diagnose cancer. There's no way to treat cancer, as we've heard. And this is just cancer. And then there's like heart disease, diabetes, high blood pressure. Like these things are just, and the patients that will die from these conditions who have already died, they're not counted in this like, dystopian, we were talking about it earlier, this like dystopian like weather news report where, oh, today this many Palestinians were killed, or around like 33,000 now. They're not even counted as a number because it's not seen as a direct cause of the genocide. It's not a direct cause of the structural oppression or the apartheid conditions, but they are, right? When healthcare is systematically attacked to the point where people are dying in by these chronic diseases and will continue to die from them even after a ceasefire. So I hope we continue to think about the ways in which we even conceptualize moving forward these shared struggles for liberation, these shared struggles for humanizing people who even here in the context of Canada are dehumanized because of their intersectional identity.
Maybe my last, the last thing that I just want to sort of surface or put in the foreground is my ongoing commitment to Palestinian people and the enormous, enormous gratitude I feel in our friendships and in our kinships that you would brazenly feel the future with me and brazenly speak about going home, and that until then you have a home in me and you have a home in our territories, and I will honor that always. Yeah.
I want to share a quote from a nephrologist, Dr. Hammam Alo, who was murdered by Israel during this last 6 months, and just started off by saying that Palestinians are not a helpless people, and I know that we haven't perpetuated that today. I just want to remind people that they are powerful, they are fierce, they are literally our teachers, our educators, they are our leaders in so many ways, and that we attend these events to follow in their lead and to uplift them and to be their net when they need somewhere to fall. We are there to be there with them, alongside them, hold their hand and fight for them. This is not a helpless group of people that we're here to save. I want to share that and highlight that through his quote, where he said in an interview, "And if I go, who treats my patients? You think I went to medical school for 14 years so I can only think about my life and not my patients? I'm asking you, ma'am, do you think this is the reason I went to medical school, to think only about my life? This is not the reason I became a doctor." And he was murdered, I believe, the following day after this interview. And he never abandoned his patients, and they are our leaders, and these are the people that are my heroes and who I follow in their lead.
You know, I think that what I'd like to take away is the inspiration to continue my unlearning and my learning. That's a lesson that I've learned coming to Canada in 2004 from South Africa, where I was thoroughly socialized in an apartheid system, and as a person with Jewish identity and ancestry, was socialized to be a Zionist. And I'm just so grateful to the compassion of Indigenous peoples and Palestinian peoples that I've met, who've welcomed me into the journey of unlearning and learning.
Thank you all. My last remark is going to be a poem. I know many of you have heard this poem before. It's If I Must Die by Razing. And I'm reading it today because, well, first of all, there are no Palestinians up here, and I know that Dr. Nala just, made sure to tell us that we also need to give our Palestinian colleagues, friends, community members a break, but also to tell them that we are here in solidarity. As they say in the protests, in our thousands, in our millions, we're all Palestinians. But also, the reason why I'm reading this is because I think a lot of the events that are being organized, the talks, the workshops, the sessions, the discussions, all of this work, the protests, is in some ways an answer to the call of Rifat. If I must die. If I must die, you must live to tell my story, to sell my things, to buy a piece of cloth and some strings. Make it white with a long tail, so that a child, somewhere in Gaza, while looking heaven in the eye, awaiting his dad who left it ablaze, and bid no one farewell, not even to his flesh, not even to himself, sees the kite, my kite you made, flying up above, and thinks for a moment an angel is there, bringing back love. If I must die, let it bring hope, let it be a tale. To Rifat, I hope that our efforts here, there, and everywhere will ensure that this is the tallest tale of all time. Thank you. I'm so sorry that we have to vacate the room, but thank you everyone for your incredible words, your wisdom, and your solidarity. Thank you all for being here. Be safe. This has been true.